Hello, everyone. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Jenny Hamel, education reporter and producer for IdeaStream. It is March 30th, and you are with a virtual City Club forum. As Ohio begins to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Mike DeWine has given all Ohio public school districts a deadline of April 1st to formulate and submit a plan to address the educational losses students sustained during the past year. Now, many school districts, particularly the big urban districts, were 100% remote since last spring when the governor first shut schools down due to the risk of COVID-19. That means children have been learning remotely for about a year. Now, while there is discussion and even controversy amongst educators and experts about the extent of learning loss experienced by each individual student, there is data that points to concerning trends when it comes to how much the pandemic impacted students and how much they've learned. For example, third grade English language arts scores in Ohio were considerably lower this past fall than they were in 2019, equating to about 1/3 of a year's worth of lost learning for the average Ohio third grader. And the decline was more pronounced among economically disadvantaged children. While these plans are being constructed, Congress has passed the American Rescue Plan Act, which includes about $125 billion in new and very flexible funds for school districts, which they will be able to spend to address the pandemic and its effects on student learning. It is the largest ever one-time federal investment in K-12 education. So today we've assembled a great group of educators and experts to talk about learning loss. How big an issue is it? How do we measure it? And how do we help get kids to the place they deserve to be after a really grueling and intense time that is still ongoing? So we're going to talk about this, the challenges and the opportunities facing public school districts moving forward. As with every City Club forum, you can participate with your questions. You can text them to 330-541-5794. That again is 330-541-5794. You can tweet them at the City Club. We'll try to work those questions in. Now for today's speakers and guests. Joining us today, Donald Jolly, the second superintendent for Warrensville Heights City School District. He became superintendent in 2015 after serving as academic superintendent in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Welcome, Donald.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
We also have Shari Obrenski, president of the Cleveland Teachers Union. She was elected president in April 2020, just in time for the pandemic, after serving as an American history and government teacher at the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Welcome, Shari.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we also have Dr. Bob Slavin, professor and director of the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins School of Education. He is also the co-founder of Success for All Foundation, an organization dedicated to the development, evaluation, and dissemination of research-proven reform models for pre-K through grade 12, especially those serving many children considered at risk. So I'd like to begin locally. I'd like to go to Superintendent Jolly. Donald, you and I have spoken throughout the school year and recently about your concerns when it comes to not all, but a great majority of your students and what you feel the pandemic has been, what the impact has been on your students while they have almost been 100% remote for almost a year. So why don't you iterate what your concerns have been and what you found?
Yeah, so our concerns have centered around our most youngest students. We've looked at our data and just give a background on our district. Our district was a failing district. And the fight for us to get our kids on grade level has been one since I've been here. And what we've seen with the pandemic has almost erased a lot of our gains. At this time, we see that our kindergartners are like 10% of our kindergartners are not at grade level. We see 19% of our first graders are not at grade level. Our third graders, which last year we took the test in January, we have 45% of our third grade graders pass the test during mid-year. And currently we only have 24% that is on track to pass the third grade test. So what we've seen, and we've been sporadically in school, we brought back our kindergarten and first graders in September. And then due to various cases and things we had to shut down. But we came back in January. January 25th was our day of coming back. And right now we're about 50% in person, 50% virtual. But what our teachers and my teachers are the most valuable resource. What they've shared is that they see significant losses in our students. They're saying on our timing, like where we're normally at developmentally in March, that we're about October, November. They see, especially with our first graders who were kindergartners last year, just basic writing is we're suffering. We see, just letter recognition. A lot of the basic things that being in person helps or contributes to success. There are some large gaps. We also have students who are doing exceptionally well, but for the majority, the loss of learning during the pandemic, and I can say our teachers did a great job of doing online instruction, trying to differentiate online, but the partnerships between parents and some kids who are daycare centers and some people with grandparents, some of the home situations did not promote the academic focus that was necessary to keep our kids on track. And even looking at F's and failures in our middle school, we got failures up 26%. A lot of it is contributed to the hand-to-hand things that our teachers do face-to-face that with the pandemic they weren't able to do. So I'm very concerned. I'm just looking at our data, looking at the current status of where our students are, and I'm concerned about the future. And just being here in our district, we had a fight with House Bill 70. We are the first district to go from an F to a C. All those gains that we achieved going backwards due to the pandemic and things we had no control over. So with that, the data that we have has indicated that we have suffered significant loss within our district, and we're very concerned about it.
And how about your upperclassmen? I have heard anecdotally from some of the bigger urban districts, from superintendents and other staffers that, literally juniors and seniors taking on full-time jobs in districts that were fully remote. What was the situation for you?
So we had the same situation with our seniors. We just did a count of our seniors, and a lot of our seniors did take on full-time jobs. School became secondary because they had the time due to the virtual learning situation. So we required those seniors that was in trouble to come back to school. They had to come back to school in order to graduate, because in those cases, the in-person, the teacher, who is the biggest asset in this whole thing, being with the student has been the most beneficial. And we've seen that since they came back, they've done much better, because the distractions at home are not there when you're in school with teachers who care about you and care about your well-being.
And I guess one of the things that you had told me that I thought was particularly striking, kind of visualizing maybe what a younger child, a young scholar, as you call them, has or has not learned, was the fact that at this point, some of those young kids would be able to write their name. But because you said they haven't had practice at home, that just writing letters is not something that they have a grasp of yet.
Yeah, in particular, we saw that in our first grade and kindergartners. I mean, just, if we go to school every day, you write your name 10 times a day. Now, when we transfer a student to our computer, they're not writing their name unless, a parent is making you write your name every day. Just basic things like that. Just writing your name, you write it 100 times a week if you're in school, and now you're on the computer, you're typing it. So just basic things like that is what our teachers, and we've discovered that those are things that developmentally have them 6 months behind in our small district. And I do have to reiterate, our district is very small, only 5 schools, and we're able to see a lot of things quick because it's right here on top of us. So we see it, and then we have the ability, with us being real small, to act immediately.
So, Shari, I turn to you. You're from a really large district, and I know it's a little bit harder to kind of amass all the information to indicate exactly where all the students are. I'd love to know. I kind of, we've talked many times before, but what is your assessment of learning loss, when it comes to Cleveland metropolitan schools, how big an issue is it in your eyes? Is it still yet to be learned? Your thoughts?
Well, I think first, we are going to have to take some time to figure out exactly where the kids are. We need to do some diagnostic work with our students now that we're getting them back in person to see what they have succeeded at while we have been remote and where they're struggling, and then put that together to help them come along in those areas of struggle. I think one of the things, while I'm extremely concerned about students and their welfare and what they are struggling with at this point, and we've had this conversation, I very much struggle with the term learning loss because our students haven't stopped learning during the pandemic. They may not have been learning all of the academic things that we normally spend time on, but I know in Cleveland, one of the things that our students have learned that they wouldn't have learned otherwise is how to navigate electronically using the internet, using platforms and learning platforms, video conferencing platforms, all of those other things. We didn't have that prior to the pandemic. And so our students have learned things that they might never have learned before prior to the pandemic or without the pandemic. And then there's some other things that if we hadn't been in remote learning, students might be a little further ahead. So it's going to take us some time to put all of those things together to balance those. And, you know, we've been in a remote situation for a year. We're not going to come out of this immediately. It's going to take some time. We're going to have to think about doing some meaningful work this summer and probably next summer and the summer after that, as well as thinking about how we structure our days during the normal school year to help our students recover not only the academically, some of the things that they may not have experienced the level of gains that we would see during the pandemic, but also, quite frankly, with their social emotional learning and how we address the trauma that the students have experienced during this remote period, and also how the rest of our school community has also experienced that trauma. So it's going to take some time for recovery.
And my sense is that you really want, as part of the conversation, in some respect, maybe not a celebration, but a recognition of, as you said, the great strides these children have made in surviving what has been a very difficult and traumatic time. I mean, we've all been under attack kind of emotionally. Am I going to get the virus or not? Family members, especially in Black and brown districts, dealing with family members getting very ill or even dying. So I get the sense that you really want that kind of perspective interjected in almost every conversation that has to do with learning loss.
Absolutely. I think it's extremely important that we have a level of positive framing. When we start talking about learning loss and we start talking about what students haven't gained, students hear that. They feel as though they're somehow deficient in that they have done something wrong or that they're not good enough. And I think that we really need to reframe the conversation so that we celebrate the fact that we're starting to come out on what I hope is the other side of the pandemic, and that we've made it this far. There's lots of great things that we've done during the remote period, and now there's new work that we have to do in order to move everyone forward. And I think that there's a way to do that recognizes that we certainly have some areas of struggle, but we also need to spend just a few moments celebrating what students have been able to accomplish in this time.
Donald, I feel like you have a response.
What's that?
Donald, did you have something you wanted to say?
With all due respect, I do respect what Ms. Obrenski is saying. And looking at, and I agree, the kids have learned a lot, but in 3 weeks, the state is going to test our students. In 3 weeks, they're going to test our students and use the data later for other purposes, in particularly school choice. So while we do celebrate the learning growth, from my perspective and from the Warrensville perspective, we got to get to action immediately because the time doesn't stop for these children. The kids that are in outer ring suburbs have been in school the whole time, and the expectation is at a certain grade level they are supposed to know certain information. And next year, the year after that, they're going to hold these kids accountable to what they should know and not know. And the pandemic, and just in my opinion, this time is going to be lost, or not lost, but it's not going to be viewed on as a safe harbor for districts like mine who have fought school takeover, whose students who need to achieve and be ready to go into the real world and be successful. So with that, we do celebrate the successes of our teachers. They grew during this break. Our students grew, but also on the ground, the expectation of the state and stakeholders is that the kids know certain things at the end of a grade level. So we have to, from my perspective, we have to celebrate and then we have to take immediate action. Because if we don't take action in 2 or 3 years from now, my fear is the kids are going to be the people that get the blame, not the pandemic or the situation that caused the pandemic.
So, Bob, I now turn to you. I mean, obviously, we're all in the same boat, wanting the best for these students, wanting them to learn as much as they can. I mean, and I know that Shari, Donald are so committed to these children, but there is kind of this tension about, about how we approach this, how we have a dialogue about it. What have you seen when it comes to the data, the research of the national landscape, when it comes to the realities of this learning loss and who it's impacting the most?
I think there's no question that there are many children who have been deeply affected in a negative way from the COVID experience. Yes, there are many children who are going to do fine. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, who's in kindergarten, and she spent up until very recently, she was completely online, but she had us as grandparents, and she had her parents as parents, and she had plenty of help, and it wasn't ideal, to be learning only online from a teacher that she'd never met in a school that she'd never set foot in, but she'll be fine. On the other hand, we work with many, many children in Baltimore and many other places for whom things have been catastrophic. They've not had any involvement at all with the remote learning. Either they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the assistance, they were in chaotic circumstances. There may have been computers in their home, but other people had to use them as well. It's just, there are a lot of kids who are likely to have lost out, or certain to have lost out. I mean, we're seeing this now as kids are coming back to school. And unfortunately, they tend to be the kids who were not doing that well before. So that it's often that what happened with COVID is compounding problems that kids are likely to have had before. But I mean, I was looking at data, in 2019, before COVID was ever heard of, there were 9.5 million fourth graders who were reading below the basic level on NAEP, on the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's very low. That's that's a major crisis, but it's the same. It's not a new crisis. It's been true for as long as there has been National Assessment of Educational Progress, there have been many such children, and they tend to be disproportionately disadvantaged. They tend to be from poor families who are in high poverty districts that are not able to do what really is necessary to get to them. So this is certainly a catastrophe for many, many children, not for all of them, but many children, and has to be treated that way. I think that Shari's point is exactly right. There has to be diagnostic testing to help kids get back on track, to be sure that you understand what they can do and what they can't do, and then but also that it is really important to then start using proven strategies that will accelerate kids, that will take them where they are, wherever it may be, and move them forward as quickly as possible, particularly the kids who are furthest behind. What we don't want to have is a situation in which kids come back to school, they're far behind, they may have been behind even before COVID, and now they're worse, and they spend a year waiting for intervention and feeling, I can't do school, I hate school, this is awful, that kids don't want to fail, and a lot of them are going to experience a level of failure and of difficulty that we have to be able to respond to with the best interventions that we have.
And Bob, how I originally found you was, we were doing some reporting at my station about the solutions when it comes to this disruption on academic progress this year. And is this, if there are a wide range of whether a student experienced learning loss or did not, and maybe even excelled in the complete remote environment, or just did fine because they're independently driven, broadband access at home, whatever you have it. How do we create that kind of equity or that equal landscape for all these students so that we find out who's got the gaps and how quickly do we act on filling those gaps, or does the educational field act on filling those gaps? Is it something that can be done slowly over years, or does it need to be hit on this summer?
So I like to speak to that because, again, I have to talk on relative sense of us being small. So
Sure.
We're being very small. We've already tested our kids already, so we know exactly where they are. So what we've done is work collaboratively with our union to look at our fourth quarter and make our fourth quarter basically just an intervention fourth quarter. Where basically all the teachers, we're taking all our teachers, looking at their strengths, and then we're putting our students based on their skills with those teachers. And then the students will have opportunity to, I don't want to say test out, but earn their way out. Once they have mastered the skill, then they go to the next skill. So we had that rotating cycle for the fourth quarter. We also have an agreement with our union to do an extra 17 days at the end of the school year. So instead of ending the school year June 4th, we're going to end on June 30th. Again, to provide more intervention, really giving each child an individualized education plan based upon their individual needs, and then using our staff, matching strengths and weaknesses for our students. It's easier for us because we're small. We got one elementary school now, so but that one elementary school, we put all hands on deck, tested all the kids. That's what we've been doing since January. And going into the fourth quarter, our intervention plans would start. That's K-12 to try to fill the gaps because we identify what the gaps are. Now it's just filling in the cracks to make sure. And even this probably will go into the first quarter of next year because some of the virtual kids are not going to come in. They're not going to come back. And we hope that they come back in the spring, in the fall, so that we can catch them up too. But again, I just want to say I appreciate our union partners because they've been willing to cooperate and do the things, they push and we push, but together I think we all have the best interest of the students. So it's worked well for us here in our small district.
Shari, I'll turn to you. Has Eric Gordon, the CMSD CEO, have you had any sort of formal conversation about, the plan is due April 1st. I've been trying to find out what it is. I think I have a sense, but, Eric's very good about making sure families know before the press does, which is a respectful strategy. But have you had conversations about an organized approach to dealing with student learning loss, or what it looks like at the district level?
We've had some conversation around that to this point, and we've talked about short term, but again, we've also talked about long term strategies. So we're talking about what it looks like over the next few weeks, what it looks like over the summer, what the school year will look like next year, and really taking both a short, medium, and long-term approach to how we are going to deal with the recovery, because this is a recovery period. We have been through something very traumatic, and And again, while I truly appreciate the emphasis on academics, it's also going to be critical as we bring our students back that we are focusing on trauma, we are focusing on social emotional learning, building relationships. In some respects, we may have to go a little bit slow in the beginning to go fast later on. It's making sure that our kids are feeling comfortable about being back in school, that our staff is feeling comfortable about being back in school, so that we can we can get to the academics and the weightier issues. If I don't feel safe and comfortable, it's going to inhibit my learning as I move forward. So those are some of the things that we're dealing with right now. And I also think, to Bob's point earlier, it's not like school has been working really well for some of our kids for a long period of time. We have an opportunity to listen and to learn from what we have experienced over the last 12 months, examine those inequities that have been laid bare during this pandemic, and then learn from those things and build a system that works better for kids moving forward. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to think about in Cleveland, to do some thoughtful work around making sure that we're addressing our students and the challenges in the short term, but also how do we build this system long term to serve our students and their families better in a more holistic approach, paying attention to academics and reading, writing, and arithmetic, which we focused really heavily on over the past, in the almost 23 years I've been in Cleveland. We spent a lot of time on reading, writing, and arithmetic. And we still have a tendency to struggle with our scores. It's more than just that. There are lots of things that we have to take a look at, and building a system where our kids want to come to school and learn, our educators want to be there, our families feel excited about the experiences for their kids, and that's what we are going to be looking at as we form a long-term strategy moving forward, is to try to bring that joy and excitement back into learning and really taking some of the lessons from the pandemic to heart and making our system better.
So, Bob, we're talking about a federal commitment of monies, a real national recognition that districts need help if they are going to help these students academically. And as Shari's pointing out, super importantly, just making the student feel whole. And we've been in triage, and now we're trying to come out of that. So I totally respect that. What are some of the things that we can do? One thing about education, it's like to go from policy to the actual student and his or her well-being. It can look like two different animals or just be discussed in different ways. So what are some of the things that you think the local school district can do to help these kids catch up? And do you have insight into dialogues? How do they talk to these children about, you have to go to school longer, or this is what this year has looked like? I'm sorry, it's been a struggle. Is there thought and effort being put into how we care for these children too, emotionally, having endured such a difficult time?
Well, let me start with the strategies that schools can use to confront the academic losses. There's no question that dealing with social emotional issues is paramount. That has to be taking place as well. But we would not be doing a good service to our children if that's all we focused on. We also, and Shari's saying the same, that we have to do something in academics that is not ordinary, that's not just what was going on before, because there's a much bigger problem now. We did some reviews of research and looked at all different kinds of things that people were proposing in the way of programs to try to make a big difference for students who are struggling. We looked at tutoring. We looked at summer school, after school programs, extended day, technology programs. And the thing that was striking was that tutoring is so much more effective than any of the other strategies, that we began to focus primarily on ways to provide one-to-one or one-to-small group tutoring to as many students as possible, particularly students in elementary schools and in reading. Now, there are great tutoring programs for mathematics as well, and in secondary schools for mathematics. But I think that the main emphasis needs to be on trying to make sure that every kid is well on the way to success in reading from whatever baseline they're starting with.
Interject real quick. When you say tutoring, you mean one-to-one or one, you've told me this before, small group contact. Why is that so effective?
Well, I think there are several things. One of them is that when you're working one-to-one, 1-to-3, 1-to-4, you can be very, very aware of exactly where each child is, how they're progressing on a day-to-day basis. You can personalize the instruction for the needs of that particular child, for the level of the child, but also their learning styles and so on, in a way that's very difficult to do with a class of 20 or 25 or 30. Secondly, I think that in a tutoring situation, you can form a relationship between tutors and kids that's hard to do in a whole class, where you get to know the kid very well. You get to know how, what turns them on and how they learn uniquely different from some other kid. So there are a number of different tutoring strategies that, in fact, one of the things that we've been doing lately, we brought together the 14 tutoring strategies with the strongest evidence of effectiveness kind of into a coalition to make the case for proven tutoring strategies and to kind of do joint outreach to districts and states, both to argue for the use of proven tutoring, but also to say, well, here's a set of programs. Pick one. All of them are effective. You can't go wrong. You might like this one, or this one costs more or less, but I think it's really important to have tutoring, not the only thing you do, but to have tutoring as a centerpiece of what you do to try to welcome kids back to school and be able to look them in the eye and say, this time you will succeed. We're going to be using strategies that we know for sure are going to work and personalized to your situation, and you will succeed. I think you hear that with Mr. Jolly talking about the trying to do intensive remediation or intensive service for the kids coming back. I think that's exactly the right kind of attitude. The kids know what it means to be successful in school. You can't fool them. And the main thing it means, especially in elementary school, is it means that you can read. So for the kids to see themselves making rapid progress because of use of effective tutoring programs is really important to enable kids to feel that this time they are going to succeed in school. Whatever may have happened during COVID, the school is ready for them. It's ready to make a really big difference in their lives.
Can I speak to the social emotional? Because I do believe that's very important. And through this crisis, we found that family support is key. So one of the things we've done is make sure that they eat. So we do a family, during the COVID, we did a busing, make sure everybody ate every day. We had our buses go to mobile meals program. But we also partner with some community partners to make sure that families have support. So that they actually go to the homes and provide support to the families, counseling or whatever else that's necessary and needed. We also hired a position called culture coaches, which serves as the liaison between the staff, parents, and the students. And these individuals work with the students. When the students have outbursts and so forth, they go right to the student and they're able to hear the student and able to help a student. So the social emotional part is very important, and you have to invest in it. And even with school social workers and others, to provide the support, because what we found is that a lot of families during the pandemic didn't have the basic resources that the district had to supply. The school was a safe haven for kids who were abused and so forth. and those students are at home, so they didn't have any support. So as kids come back, we try to support them, but giving them connected to resources. So with that, I agree with the panel. A kid has to want to be in school and feel supported in school and be and feel loved and cared about. And I think the most important thing is relationships with the teachers, relationships with the principals has been the most important thing I've seen. The teachers' relationships with the students, for us, has been the most beneficial thing to help our students transition back to school. When our teachers wanted them there, the kids wanted to be there. And with that, we've seen some progress. We're not where we need to be, but we've seen some progress with that.
All right, it's 12:35 East Coast time. So we have passed the halfway mark of our forum. So reminding our audience, those of you enjoying and watching this really engaging conversation, if you have any questions for our speakers and guests, text them to 330-541-5794. That again is 330-541-5794. You can also tweet them at the City Club and we will try to work them in. We're already getting questions. I'm going to turn one of them to Shari, but I have a question of my own for Shari. You know, I think this is a time as well. I cover a lot of Cleveland Metropolitan School District ongoing issues. And I know that during the pandemic, I've had conversations with teachers that are in your membership. And literally, I mean, maybe not literally, but they're doing cartwheels. I mean, I've got to say, teachers all over Northeast Ohio that I've talked to have been exceptional. You know, I mean, there's varying degrees of how concerned people are about their own health and whether they wanted to go into a brick and mortar. You know, that's on everyone's independent decision making. But the effort that has been put in to make through the computer learning or hybrid learning and helping these kids has just been it's been awe-inspiring. It's been great. So I would like to know, I mean, what do you think the teachers need going forward in order to make sure that they are there for the student in a way that, like, if we needed some accelerated academic learning, we need some tutoring, all of this sort of stuff. I mean, what do they need kind of emotionally to do the best job they can to make sure these students are at the level that they need to be, so that, you know, the fourth grader in Ohio exactly, you know, is where the fourth grader in California is, no matter what economic background they're from.
Well, I think that, and to your point, the teachers throughout this pandemic have been truly incredible in thinking about what they had to do. You know, they went from not in our district, many didn't have much access to technology, right, to now they are essentially, you know, writing, producing, filming their own content, uploading it, learning these different platforms, learning management systems and different programs. And it has been an amazing effort on the part of our educators. And this has been a really challenging and stressful year all the way around. So making sure that we have some social emotional care for our adults is extremely important. And having that top of mind moving forward. It really is about taking care of the mental health of all of the members of our school community. So that's important. And then also making sure that we have the types of supports, whether it is appropriate training, high quality training, to help with the different programs or different strategies that we will have moving forward, giving them time to plan, time to work together, time to assess the students and figure out learning plans for the kids. Time is really important. And then also still figuring out how we're going to have some downtime moving into the next year. We know that there will be summer programming for our kids as we move through the summer, but figuring out, you know, who's doing what when and making sure that everyone has a little bit of downtime so that we can recharge our batteries coming into the next school year will be really important.
Okay, audience question for Shari. Do you think the pandemic has highlighted the importance of community learning centers, which try to build extra support for students and families centered on schools? Additionally, can the American Rescue Plan funds help jumpstart those kinds of efforts in Ohio?
I'd say yes and yes. I'm really excited that we were already on our way with our involvement in KS, that we have almost half of our buildings are on board with the Say Yes initiative. We will be bringing another quarter of our district on board in this upcoming school year. And within the next 2 years, all of our schools will be fully involved in the Say Yes initiative, which will bring those community learning supports and other supports into all of our schools. And also making sure that as we bring schools on board, those that don't have access because they're not fully part of the initiative yet, have additional supports to make sure that we are taking care of various needs within our school community. The partnerships that we form are incredible. It is critical to have these recovery dollars as part of these efforts. This is what's going to fund additional healthcare supports in our buildings, mental health supports, additional time, both during the summer, before and after school, all of those things, those resources that we are getting through the recovery dollars, all of those things will be funded through that money. So it's critical.
Bob, will districts be able to access the American Rescue Plan money soon enough to be able to access the tutoring, effective summer learning, and things like summer camps that include academic components? Doesn't all that take planning and, of course, government bureaucracy? And will crucial time be lost in the next few months? So what do you know as far as an answer to that question?
I think the money is going out very, very quickly, and people can count on it. But at the same time, I think that many school districts didn't do a great deal of planning until they were sure that this was all going to pass, and that it really that the feds would back them up. And so I think that there is a process of thinking through and planning that's necessary. I think that the interventions are going to be happening in 3 phases. One, there's going to be some things that Mr. Jolly was talking about, trying to use the last last months of this school year to do the best possible with the kids as they're coming in, and that even if the money were here, people had to have been planning that before the money arrived. Many people are talking about summer programs. I think that if you do invest in summer programs, I would very strongly, encourage the inclusion of one-to-one or small group tutoring as part of the summer experience. Lots of other things you can do during the summer as well. But the evidence for summer school that does not include tutoring is very, very bad. Summer school in itself has no impact on student achievement. What does have an impact is that if you use the summertime for tutoring, that can be very beneficial as well. But I think that the real investment, the larger investments, are going to take place for fall 2021. The kids will all be back, where that may not be the case in summer school. It'll be school the way school ordinarily is. Everybody's expected to be there. And at that time, I think that people will really start to focus the new money on the use of tutoring, on ways to improve social emotional learning for children and social emotional situation for teachers. I think that by then people will have had the time and need to take the time to really plan out a comprehensive way of ensuring that kids will come to a school that is welcoming, that's ready to make a big difference with them, so that they can see themselves as successful, as well as seeing themselves as welcome.
Donald, an audience question, and then I'm going to add a little Jenny question to the end of it. What are the challenges of reaching the students who need the most help with extra support in the coming months? And then what I'd like to add from that is, as their superintendent, what do you think parents can do to be aware of how their children are doing, how to kind of advocate for their child and say, I think my kid is still missing out on something. I mean, is there sort of a communication? One superintendent I did an interview with, and I'm forgetting who it was, but said the pandemic was more parent involvement than he had ever seen. I don't know if that's your situation, but again, how do you reach out to the most at-risk kids in the next coming months? And what do you need from parents in support of trying to help these students and knowing what they need?
So I would agree. The parental contact has been outstanding throughout this pandemic. But one of the biggest challenges is that some of the most needy students are very transient and they move frequently. So that's going to be our challenge is students who are continuously moving and finding them and getting them in the right place and providing them the supports they need. With parents, I think what we've done is just appeal to them the need and the necessary for remediation and acceleration too, because in this pandemic, some kids are doing exceptionally well. So as we market our extended school year, we're going to have accelerated programming too for our high school for all grade levels, and also we're going to have the remediation that's necessary, fitting the whole family or all types of students to make sure that their learning styles are met. But the challenge will be getting the ones who need it the most, first contacting them and getting them in. And we hired a truant officer, and our principals are very actively, doing home visits and doing the things necessary to try to get them in. But I will say that that's a challenge because especially during the pandemic, everyone who lived here didn't stay here. The home situations caused grandparents to take on all groups of kids. So kids might have lived here, but the grandparent lived in Shaker, and all the grandkids went to Shaker. So as kids come back home, I think we'll be able to connect with families better. But I would say that's a challenge. But once we get them and we market to them the need for their child to get this extended help on both sides, on both spectrums, I think all parents want what's best for their kids. And you have to appeal to what's best for their child. And those personal relationships, the teacher to parent contact, the principal to parent contact, superintendent to parent contact, all of us speaking the same language. I think we've proven that we've won over more than we've lost.
Okay, I want to hit on a subject that I know Donald is very passionate about, and I think it is important to the conversation, and that's just generally the idea of testing. Ohio legislators have decided to continue with the mandated tests and say they won't be punitive. I know that you, Superintendent Jolly, have been concerned that even though that they say that maybe when it comes to the 3 years of data that, determines whether, a parent can use district monies for charter schools will impact ultimately the district. So, I'm curious to get all of your thoughts on the idea of mandated testing. If we are talking about learning loss, doesn't there need to be some level of testing conducted? What does that look like? And does there need to be a punitive quality? Does that need to be done away with completely? And how is that expressed to legislators who ultimately dictate those sorts of things? So, Shari, I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned diagnostic testing, and I know that's what Warrensville Heights has carried out in order to find out in a very kind of immediate term how their kids are doing. But what testing do you think should and should not be involved when it comes to the students in the pandemics this year?
Well, I think it was disappointing that the U.S. Department of Education decided to continue with the end of year testings, the testing that's called for under the law. I don't find that, I didn't find it as a classroom educator, the end of course assessments valuable at all in terms of helping me determine where students needed additional help and support. It's not diagnostic in any way. It really is more to use it as a stick with which to beat the districts with. So I don't have much use for that. I do think that diagnostic testing is extremely important. I think that authentic performance-based assessment in this climate is extremely important. And I think that it's important for us to figure out where kids are and help determine where they need to go. and actually spend some time when we're talking about developing educators, spend time helping to develop educators on more authentic performance-based assessment types, so that we can really get down to what kids know, what they don't know, and what we need to do to help them move forward.
And Donald, same question to you. What do you think are valuable and invaluable tests when it comes to supporting the district and supporting the students?
Well, I mean, I think the tests are valuable so that we can know where our kids stand in reference to kids throughout the state. So I think that information is very valuable. My concern is when it's used against school districts to take money away. For those that know about House Bill 70, the school takeover law, that, if your district gets 3 or more consecutive Fs, then the state can take your school over. And also tying the school choice to test scores. Our concern with this year is Senate Bill 89, in which they use this year's test scores as a part of the calculation to determine what schools get assigned or what districts are eligible for school choice. Well, that's a big concern because the whole state of Ohio has been under a pandemic. It hasn't been equal access to in-person school districts. And how are we going to use that data for a district like ours, which almost $700,000 this year goes out for school choice? That is a very significant amount of money. And if that increases, it can cripple what we do here in our district. It can cripple how many teachers we have, how much resources we can provide. So for this year, and using test scores, or the test scores not being used per se as a report card grade, but later being used, is, for me, not fair at all, because for our district, it will have consequences. So the urgency that I speak to is understanding the big picture, that whatever test you take, eventually it's going to count for something. And, we would like to use it as diagnostic things, but we're in survival mode because we already been part of a attempted takeover. So we have to maintain and ensure that our kids are doing well. We have to also make sure that they're doing well socio-emotionally, and we got to continue to move forward. Because from my observations and from my time serving in this role, that the rest of the state is going to continue. They're going to have certain expectations. They don't care about the pandemic or what happened. And basically, they'll say that we're making excuses, and we can't make excuses for the lack of achievement. We got to try to figure out what's wrong, fix it, and provide our scholars what they need so that they can reach their potential. So my concerns with the testing is that they will be used later. It will affect us. So we have to make sure our kids are prepared and do their best, even though we know that it's not going to look good because of our internal data already. So what do we do to fix it next year and make sure our kids are whole, so that our district can survive? Because we're concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, you hear that, Bob. I mean, in some respects, an existential crisis for Donald. I mean, is that something you hear on the national level, or I've read about and kind of done interviews where I'm hearing anecdotally about kind of a national pushback on a lot of the testing this year, because again, like, what if it's ultimately punitive in nature, in the inner workings of a bill, or et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts, or what have you heard about the application of these standardized tests during a pandemic year, or what should be used in order to gauge students' learning or lack of learning?
I think that the conversation about using ordinary standardized tests in this particular moment, this is insanity. This is genuine insanity. The test won't be valid. And an ordinary standardized test does not give you very much information. I think Shari was pointing that out. You can use diagnostic tests that give you loads of information about what a child can actually do and what a child cannot do. They're designed for that purpose. But ordinary state tests are not designed for that purpose. And so all you get is a score or set of scores. And then I think that you have real reason to think that those scores could be misused. So you're not getting useful information, you're getting only information that schools, particularly high poverty schools, have good reason to fear will be used in nefarious ways.
All right. Seems like we're uniform in our thoughts on tests on this forum. Okay, let's use the last handful of minutes to talk about something that I think Shari has touched on in the very beginning. And is this pandemic also an opportunity for the education system? Bob, you refer to the fact that, we had a quarter of a century of not great reading levels, when it comes to students in high poverty areas. What does the pandemic provide when it comes to a change in the way we educate our kids for the better? Is there opportunities that you see coming out of this that can really transform the way K-12 students in Ohio and nationally are educated? Shari, I'll start with you.
I think it absolutely is an opportunity. If we don't learn lessons from this pandemic, then shame on us. We do have an incredible opportunity to embrace those things that we have seen have worked throughout this period, embrace the new tools that we've been able to use, and unload some of the bad practice that has been embedded in education for a long time. And because as educators, we have had to turn our job on its ear in such a short period of time, I think that there is a more of a willingness and openness to trying new and different things and seeing that we can survive it. It's okay. We can do things differently and move forward and roll with those punches. We've learned to be extremely flexible throughout the course of this year. I think that another piece that's really important, and we haven't talked about this yet, although Mr. Jolly has talked about this, is the idea that we have educators at the table, the classroom educators, the boots on the ground involved in this process. But another thing that I think is really critical is that we have to involve student voice in this process as we move forward. We need to talk to them about what they need. They need to feel invested in this process. And I think that in order for us to really make changes in education, we will have to involve students and their voices in this process to come up with a reimagining of the system that they feel excited about and that they want to be part of. And that really, I think, is a huge missing component that we've had as we've talked about all kinds of school improvement and transformation over the time that I've been involved in education. I look forward to really embracing the student voice along with the boots on the ground teacher voice in this process.
All right. And Donald, what do you say to my question about the pandemic as kind of a flashpoint or an opening for a different manner in which we educate? And maybe as Shari mentioned, and you were talking about, really validating and inviting students to be an autonomous voice in the direction that this all goes.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ms. Obrenski about just the opportunity to be flexible and creative. I think teachers have found new ways to reach students, have found new ways students learn and have reached them at all those various different levels. I think it's built capacity in everybody. I think in the principals, the administrators, the teachers, because people have had to attack problems that they never had to attack and make sure that kids are engaged on a daily basis. I think it's provided new opportunities. Whoever heard of virtual intervention? And using Zoom to do rooms to do intervention. All of these new things have came from the pandemic that we are able to take from this point moving forward. So now we don't have to send a home tutor to a home. Now we can do it virtually. We have so many new things that's came from this that I just hope that we capture it and continue to use it for the betterment of our scholars and their learning. And really value our teachers because they have done a great job, as Shari said, adapting on the run. One day we were in school, the next day we weren't. They went from having classes to being virtual to doing everything online. That that is a testament to the teaching profession and how flexible they are, and the great work they've done across the state, ensuring that kids learn every day. So I think there's a lot of lessons. I do think student voice is important, but at this point, we need to tell the students what they need, because sometimes they don't know, and we got to provide them with the guidance, and then hear them, and then adapt once we got the guidance to get them in place, and continue to provide them opportunities, because again, the world didn't stop with the pandemic. There's college applications still going out. There's still scholarships for sports and activities and all those things. So we can't use the pandemic as something like the world stopped for a year, because the world continued, and we do not want our kids behind. That's my big thing, is that, and just my observation, being out here in Warrensville, all the districts around me was in school most of the time. I do not want my third grader behind the third grader that went to Solon or Beechwood. So what do I do to make sure they catch up? And that's the urgency, because at the end of the day, that's who they're going to compete with in the world. They're not going to compete with the kids in Warrensville. They're going to compete with the kids that were in school for a year. So what do we got to do to get them there? And that's our biggest thing. And using all of the lessons learned from the pandemic and putting that in our toolbox. So now our toolbox is even greater than it was before, to make sure that we reach each and every child. So it's been a learning experience, and one that I believe that we will use to better educate students throughout this nation, this country, and especially in my small little dot on the map, Warrensville Heights.
Thanks, Donald. And Bob, what are the opportunities here? You've got the 30,000-foot view and all these federal funds pouring in. I mean, is there opportunity?
I think there's huge opportunity, and I don't know whether our school system will take advantage of them. The worst thing that we have to confront in trying to advance the achievement and school success of disadvantaged kids is complacency. We do the same thing year after year after year. We get the same results year after year after year. We come to believe that that's all we can get, that's all those kids can do. And that is so wrong. And we have better methods. We have things like tutoring. We have, new uses of technology. We have a number of proven strategies in different areas that are not widely used because we couldn't, people said, well, we can't afford them. Here we're going to have a chance to afford them. Here we're going to have a chance to use quite substantial additional money. But the schools will have to make a choice to use those if they decide to basically, go back the way things were and can continue to be complacent about the low achievement of so many kids, that not their fault, not the fault of their teachers. It won't make any difference, and we'll be confirmed in our belief that there's nothing to be done. And I think that would be a real tragedy if that were to take place.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all of your perspectives. This for me has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on today's forum on the pandemic, learning loss, and the challenges and opportunities facing public school districts moving forward. So during this hour, we've been talking to Donald Jolly II, Superintendent for Warrensville Heights City School District, Shari Obrenski, President of the Cleveland Teachers Union, and Dr. Robert Slavin, Professor and Director of the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins School of Education and co-founder of the Success for All Foundation. So to the three of you, thank you so much for joining me. Today's forum is the annual Nelson E. Weiss Memorial Forum, and attorney Mr. Weiss was a longtime member of the City Club and served as president in 1982. He had a keen interest in education, serving as a member of the Cleveland Heights University Heights Board of Education for many years. We're grateful to his friends and the law firm McDonald, Hopkins, Burke, and Haber, LLP, for honoring him with their endowment gift in support of City Club programming. Today's forum is part of the City Club's Education Innovation Series, sponsored by the Norton Corporation Foundation and PNC, with additional support from the Char and Chuck Fowler Family Foundation. All City Club's virtual forums are presented for free every week, thanks to generous support from Bank of America, KeyBank, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and PNC. You can join them in supporting City Club's mission by making a contribution online or becoming a member at cityclub.org. I am Jenny Hamel. Thanks so much for joining us today. Our forum is now adjourned. Thank you.